जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यामुनतीरवनचारी। यामुनतीरवनचारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Okay, we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, text number 11. And if somebody could get me the book, perhaps. Please excuse my voice and my sniffling. I'm feeling a little under the weather. Okay. Tasmad Daivopapannena Munyannenapi Dharmavit Santushto Haraha Kuryan Nitya Naimitiki Kriyaha Tasmatevopapannena Munyanenapi Dharmavit Santushto Haraha Kuryan Nitya Naimitiki Kriyaha Tasmatevopapannena Munyanenapi Dharmavit Santushto Haraha Kuryan Nitya Naimitiki Kriyaha Tasmad Daivopapannena Munyanenapi Dharmavit Santushto Haraha Kuryan Nitya Naimitiki Kriyaha. Anybody online?
Tasmadaivopapanena munyanenapi dharmavid santushto haraha kuryan nityanaimitiki kriyaha.
Tasmat, therefore, Deva Upapannena, obtainable very easily by the grace of the Lord. Muni Annena, with food, prepared in ghee and offered to the Supreme Lord. Api, indeed, Dharmavet, one who is actually advanced in religious principles. Santushtaha, very happily. Aha, aha, day after day. Kuryat, one should perform. Nityanaimitiki, regular and occasional. Kriyaha, duties. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation, therefore, day by day, one who is actually aware of religious principles and is not heinously envious of poor animals should happily perform daily sacrifices and those for certain occasions with whatever food is available easily by the grace of the Lord. Purport. The word dharmavit, meaning one who knows the actual purpose of religion, is very significant. As explained in Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Becoming Krishna conscious is the topmost stage of understanding religious principles. One who reaches this stage performs the archana process in devotional service. Anyone, whether a Gṛhastha, or a Sannyāsī, can keep small deities of the Lord suitably packed or, if possible, installed, and thus worship the deities of Radha, Krishna, Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narayana, Lord Jagannath, or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by offering food prepared in ghee and then offering the sanctified prasad to the forefathers, demigods, and other living entities as a matter of routine daily work. All the centers of our Krishna consciousness movement have deity worship programs very nicely going on, in which food is offered to the deity and distributed to the first-class brāhmaṇas and Vaiṣṇavas, and even to the people in general. This performance of sacrifice brings complete satisfaction. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement engage daily in such transcendental activities. Thus, in our Krishna consciousness movement, there is no question at all of killing animals. Om ajnanatimirandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam sthapitam yena bhutale svayam rupakadamahyam dadati svapadantikam vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaiṣṇavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. For some time at this temple, there's been a debate between the cooks and some of the people who are managing the cooking as to whether things should be cooked in ghee or whether things should be cooked in oil, or rather can be cooked in oil or should be cooked in oil or what have you. But anyway, this purport seems to confirm that Srila Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada described Muni, he translates this word Muni Anna. Muni Anna, Muni meaning, well, Muni can mean different things, but one thing Muni can mean is like sages, so food which is suitable for sages. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada says, offered to the Supreme Lord, so therefore suitable to the Supreme Lord, is cooked in ghee. Srila Prabhupada seems to confirm here that he thinks that that is the most first-class thing to cook for the deities. So anyway, that's a side point. But anyhow, this verse is mainly dealing with this verse is mainly dealing with the process of, well, the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about the process of archana. In the verse, these verses are talking about dharma in general. And then Srila Prabhupada describes how dharma, and not just this verse, but this whole section, the instructions for civilized human beings, is an elaboration on dharma. After this, we'll have 2 verses which describe adharma. But here is being described the path of dharma and what constitutes dharma. And like this verse says, dharmavit, one who knows dharma does these things. And particularly this verse is talking about one who is aware of religious principles, one who is dharmavit, should happily perform daily sacrifices and those for certain occasions with whatever food is easily available by the grace of the Lord. These 2 words come up. Srila Prabhupada doesn't mention them in the purport, but these 2 words come up: nitya kriya, and naimitiki kriya, which are in the kind of ritualistic aspect of Vedic life very important words, or very common words. It's 2 types of duties. Ultimately, 2 types of duties, or 2 types of, you could say, rituals. Shastra recommends, the Vedic literatures in general recommend a certain amount of ritualism in one's life, and depending on who one is. And these rituals are of 2 kinds, nitya and naimitiki. So nitya means eternal, and in this case, nitya means regular or daily. It's things that one should do every day. And there are different systems. There are different systems of which describe what exactly a nitya kriya is, what exactly a nitya kriya, nitya karma. These words are also used. Karma just means activity or work. So nitya karma, this word is used. Kriya is also used. So in general, there are 6 which are accepted. There are 6 which are accepted basically as you could say canonical or common. And so those 6 are given by Parashara Muni and a book called Parashara Smriti. Parashara Smriti is a book which comes in the section of the Vedic literatures called Dharma Shastra. So one section of the Vedas is called Dharma Shastra, and it deals with these kinds of things. It deals with what one should do and what one shouldn't do. Excuse me. Not so much philosophy in those books, actually. Some of the major Dharma Shastras include Manu Smriti, which Srila Prabhupada quotes from quite often, Parashara Smriti, which is described as the Dharma Shastra, which is meant to be followed in Kali Yuga, and Apastamba also, Apastamba Dharma Sutras there, which is a common one. Yajnavalkya Smriti is another common one. These are commonly, or you could say the major Dharma Shastras. So Dharma Shastra doesn't deal much with philosophy. I'm not so much familiar with, or the only one that I'm a little bit familiar with is Manu Smriti. I know in Manu Smriti, at the very end, mostly Manu Smriti talks about things like the duties of the different castes, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. It deals with marriage, it deals with how a king should rule. It deals with organizing society, punishment, and means like, punishment, crime and punishment, taxes, things like that. Just it's mostly organizational kind of social things. It also deals with outcasts, things like that. At the very end, there is a very small discussion of philosophy, but in terms of, I guess you would say, our understanding of Vedic philosophy, it's not a very advanced discussion. It's preliminary, just basic philosophical principles it gives. So, but anyway, I was saying that Parashara Smriti deals with or posits these 6 main nitya karmas or nitya kriyas. And they're basic things, as you'll be able to understand. Snan, bathing, one should bathe every day. Snana, homa, one should do some kind of traditionally fire sacrifices done every day, either just in the morning or in the morning and the evening. Agnihotra is done. So snana, homa, tarpana, or making offerings to the, tarpana is counted as 2 because, there's 2 kinds of tarpana. There's rishi tarpana, offerings to the sages, and then there's actually multiple kinds. It's not just, there's actually a few kinds. There's offerings to the demigods, offerings to the rishis and the sages, offerings to the ancestors. Specifically, it said that one should do offerings to the ancestors every day. And it just consists of offering some water and some grains like that. So that's 3. And then one of them is veneration of elders. So this is, the Sanskrit word for this is not abhigamana. What is it? Anyway, I'm forgetting the Sanskrit term. But anyway, it said that one should venerate their elders every day. There's a specific process given. You bow down before them and you state your gotra, the lineage of your family. You state your gotra, and you don't sit on the same level as them. You sit below them, and you offer respects to them like that. So that's 4. Then Sandhya Vandanam, which is a ritual which is performed in the morning and at noon and at evening. It consists of some of these things, like during Sandhya Vandanam, one offers tarpana to the rishis and to the forefathers at certain parts of the day. And then the 6th one is, I think I have it here in my notes. Yes, reciting the Vedas, Parayanam. One should, generally speaking, brāhmaṇas who study the Vedas, they study one Veda. So you have sometimes, people refer to like Rig Vedis or Sama Vedis or, Yajur Vedis. So they, or perhaps even more advanced than that, some people have the last name Chaturvedi or Trivedi, Chaturvedi, which means that they know all 4 Vedas or they know 3 Vedas fully. It means they can recite them completely. So one should do that every day. One's particular Veda which they study, they should recite it every day. So these are the 3 nitya karmas or nitya kriyas that are referred to in excuse me, in Dharma Shastra. Now, if you look into it, they're extremely elaborate. They're extremely complicated, and practically you could spend all day just doing them if you wanted to. Just doing Sandhya Vandanam basically 3 times a day. Sandhya Vandanam is basically what we chant Gayatri. Sandhya means the junction between parts of the day. So there's a Sandhya in the morning, where basically where night turns into morning, when the sun rises. There's a Sandhya in the middle of the day when basically morning turns into afternoon, and there's a Sandhya or a junction in the evening when the afternoon turns into the night. So at those 3 times of the day, we are, or at least brāhmanas, they remember the Supreme Lord and they recite prayers to him, certain mantras that they chant at those times, and amongst other rituals. But for, you could say maybe perhaps traditionally or according to Dharma Shastra, that process takes about 20 to 30 minutes, 3 times a day. What to speak of the other things, Agnihotra, doing a whole puja, yajna twice a day, they're very elaborate, and you have to learn all kinds of mantras, what to speak of reciting an entire Veda. You have to learn the pronunciation, and you have to be able to, of course, just like remember it, the entire thing. So it's very elaborate rituals. People who are trained in these rituals, they're trained from the very beginning of their life, from basically when somebody who's born in a brāhmana family or any family who is twice born, which, the higher castes, they're trained from basically when they're 8 years old. That's when they get their upanayanam, their sacred thread, or their second birth, you could say. So from then on, they're trained from the time that they're 8 years old. They're trained for the rest of their life to follow these things every single day. And then you have things, then there's the other one, naimittika karma. Naimittika karma, naimitiki kriya, as it's mentioned here, just refers to things like, Srila Prabhupada trains it as daily sacrifices, and those for certain occasions. There are some things you don't do every day. There's some things like, for instance, performing shraddha, offering, oblations to somebody who's passed away, or offerings to those who have, somebody who's passed away, recently passed away. Samskaras, like there's, like I said, the sacred thread ceremony, it's only performed once. Also other things like festivals are only done at certain times of the year. We only celebrate Janmashtami once a year. At least you could say maybe externally, of course, we're always celebrating Krishna's pastimes, are always glorifying Krishna's activities. But at least once a year, we particularly perform the rituals for Janmashtami and things like that. So all of these things, like I said, are extremely elaborate. They require training from the beginning of one's life. And not only do they require training from the beginning of one's life, but they actually require a certain amount of prarabdha karma. They require a certain amount of, means you need to have a suitable body, you need to have a suitable mind to perform them. There are certain people, for instance, who, well, I should say that people who are born in that culture, who are born, who have the karma to take bodies in, extremely pious, extremely devout brāhmana families, they have certain bodily features, like, for instance, the way that they can move their mouths. There are certain sounds that they can make. Now, of course, these people are very rare nowadays, but there are certain sounds that can be made only if you have a certain body suitable to make them. So Sanskrit pronunciation, for some people, it's not possible to move your mouth in that way unless you're trained from the beginning of your life. It's just not possible. And those people, their pronunciation is said to be spashta, or very clear. So yes, to be able to move your mouth in certain ways, also for your body to be able to undergo certain austerities, and your mind to be able to remember certain things. It requires a certain amount of karma, a certain amount of pious karma to be able to do those things. Therefore, many of these rituals are limited only to born brāhmanas, only to those who are born in brāhmana families. For instance, Shudras and lower castes are not permitted to recite the Vedas. They're not permitted to, some perform Sandhya Vandanam. They're not permitted to do homa. They're not permitted to do sacrifices because they'll mess the whole thing up. And it will incur sin, actually. And so the point of these all fall under the section of Vedic literature is known as Karmakanda. Karmakanda, the point of Karmakanda is what? The point of Karmakanda is basically to avoid sin. That's the whole point, to avoid sin. And this comes up in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Well, actually, it comes up first. It comes up first in the 2nd chapter. It comes up first in the 1st chapter, actually, because Arjuna says to Krishna, he's bewildered, he doesn't want to fight, and one of the arguments that he gives 4 arguments. One of them is he's quoting from Karmakanda, or he's you could say appealing to Karmakanda. He says, Papameva Shreya Dasmad hatvaitan atatayinaha. Tasma narhavayam huntum dhartarashtran sabhandavan. He says that if we kill the Dhartarashtrans, or the sons of Dhritarashtra, then papamevashraya dasma, there will be an incurrence of sin. It's sinful, I can't do it. There he says, Tasma narhavayam huntum Dhartarashtrans sabhandavan. Therefore, we shouldn't kill them. We should not kill the sons of Dhritarashtra. And then he says, excuse me, Svajanam hikatam hadva sukhina syama madhava. He says, how can we become happy? He says, Madhava, how can we become happy by killing our svajana, by killing our own people? How is it possible? So, what is the purpose of being free from sin, according to Karmakanda? It's to be happy. That's it. The purpose of Karmakanda is to become free from sin so that one can become happy. At least that's the purpose that Karmakanda states. And then, of course, the means for becoming happy is by following, or the means for becoming free from sin and therefore becoming happy is by following Dharma. And Krishna responds to Arjuna in the 3rd chapter. He says, Yadrichaya chopapanam swargadvaram apavratam sukhina kshatriyah partha labante yudham idrasham. He says that Yadrichaya chopapanam swargadvaram apavratam, that by fighting, actually, by doing this, you swargadvaram apavratam, the doors to the heavenly planets will be opened. And then he says, Sukhina kshatriyah partha labhante yudham idrasham. And he said, therefore, kshatriyas, people who are in that caste, become very happy. Sukhina kshatriyah partha labhante yudham idrasham, when opportunities for fighting come up on their own. Because by following that duty, then it opens the door for heavenly happiness. And then he says, why is that the case? Atachetvam imam dharmam sangramam na karishyasi. Because if, on the plea of Dharma, you don't fight, sangramam na karishyasi, then he says, tatasva dharmam kirtim cha hitva papam avapsyasi. He says, your fame, which is important for a kshatriya, he says, your fame, what is it? Tatat swadharmam kirtim cha. Yeah, your swadharma, your occupational duty, or the duty of your caste, and your fame will be ruined. So you'll be miserable in this world, and then at the same time in the next world, hitva papam avapsyasi, you'll incur sin, and therefore you won't even be able to be happy after this life. So the whole purpose of Karmakanda is to be happy, and one becomes happy by following Dharma. And there's a verse in Mahabharata, which, in one sense, Mahabharata is for the purpose of, Mahabharata isn't exactly like a purely devotional text, like, say, Bhagavad Gita. Well, of course, Bhagavad Gita is within Mahabharata, but like Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, you could take as a standalone book. But it appeals a lot to Karmakanda. So in Mahabharata, there is a verse that says, Ahimsa paramo dharma, that the highest dharma is ahimsa. The highest dharma is non-violence. Of course, then you could say, why did Krishna have Arjuna fight? Well, the next line of the verse actually is, what's the next line of the verse? Dharma, dharmo himsa tativacha, that so too is violence for the sake of maintaining dharma, for kshatriyas, for those who are qualified to do it, of course. So those things are there. But therefore, Shastra never recommends, like it's being mentioned here in the last verse, here and in the last verse, that Shastra never recommends the killing of animals. There's a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto, in the section where the Nevi-Yogendras are speaking to Maharaj Nimi, that says, Loke vyavayamisha madhyaseva nityahi jantur nahi tatra chodana vyavasthatisteshu vivaha yajna suragrahai rasu nivritrishta. That Loke vyavayamisha madhyaseva, Nitya hi jantur nahi tatra chodana. That Shastra will never recommend, Shastra never recommends killing animals, never recommends illicit sex, and never recommends and it never recommends intoxication. Because nitya hi jantur nahi, because nitya hi jantur. Because these are the propensities of jantus, of sinful living entities, of living entities who are, you could say, materially contaminated. The propensities for intoxication, the propensities for eating meat, and killing animals, and the propensity for having illicit sexual relations are there anyways. They're gonna do it anyway. Shastra doesn't have to recommend it, But also, they're gonna do it anyways. But Shastra will never recommend it because it's not good for them. It incurs bad karma. It incurs sinful karma by which one has to suffer. However, because they're going to do it anyway, or because that propensity is not going to leave them just by instruction. Of course, in some that might be the case. But therefore, these processes of yajna are given. There are certain processes like vivastisisteshu vivaha yajna. So vivaha, marriage. Within marriage, and then Srila Prabhupada, and not just Srila Prabhupada, but Shastra in general, says within marriage and for the purpose of procreation, one can have sex. Yajna, if one performs a sacrifice, there are certain sacrifices which the product of the sacrifice, there is some meat. One can eat that meat if one properly does the yajna. Vivaha yajna, suragraharasu nivrittirishta. And then there are also certain yajnas in which alcohol is used. And then for certain people, one can take the remnants of that sacrifice, provided one performs the sacrifice perfectly, one can take that. But it says, suragraherasu nivrittirishta. But all these things are ultimately meant for renunciation. They are concessions. They're concessions meant to help one in an extremely restricted and regulated way, kind of indulge, their desires, ultimately for the purpose of breeding within them renunciation, ultimately for the purpose of showing them that these things are not good, ultimately for the purpose of showing them that, and really the whole point of karmakanda is to bring one to the point where they understand that they are not the center. And that other living beings, like for instance, there's this verse, Ye tvaneva vidosantas saddasadamimaninaha, that pashundruhyandi vishrabdha prete kadanti techatan. That one who is, who thinks himself very saintly, mercilessly kills animals, even, on the plea of being dharmic. But he has no idea that those animals will kill him in his next life. Therefore, this word for meat, the word for meat in Sanskrit is mamsa. Mamsa means mam saha. Mam means unto me, and saha means him. So him unto me. That is basically means either I will become him, or he will devour me. That's the understanding. And there's a verse like that Srila Prabhupada quotes. And this verse also. Basically, the only reason for killing animals in this world, and especially also in the name of sacrifice, is basically one is so caught up and thinks that their pleasure, their personal pleasure, is so important that it is more important than the life of an innocent being. And then it also brings up, because animals are innocent, this verse that I quoted, that animals are by nature trusting. They trust their masters, those who take care of them. They trust them. So one who thinks that his pleasure is so important and thinks that his pleasure is the center of everything, and as such is willing to kill somebody who trusts him and who is taking shelter of him, that person is excuse me. That's a very sinful thing to do. It's not a very good thing to do at all. And therefore, there's a reaction for it. And so, therefore, there's a reaction for it, and therefore Shastra or the Vedas or the Vedic literatures never recommend doing such a thing. Because the whole point of these rituals, the whole point of these sacrifices, means these rituals for the purpose of elevation are to show one that, hey, you're not the center. Because they're based in duty. The whole point is duty. That one does these things as a duty to, for instance, their ancestors, as a duty to the Supreme Lord, as a duty to their elders who are still alive, as a duty to the sages who have given them knowledge, as a duty to repay their debts, like that. So the whole point is to show that you're not the center. Therefore, Krishna says, "Ishtan bhogan hivo deva." Dasyante yajna bhavata, that the devas, they will provide you, if you engage in yajna, if you engage in these sacrifices and rituals, the devas or the demigods will provide you with prosperity. But ter datan apradayebhya yo bhunkte evastena saha. No, stena evasaha, sorry. But one who enjoys them without offering, the results, to basically the devas again, but without offering the results to the devas, one who does that is a thief. One who enjoys separately, or one who doesn't acknowledge that that whatever is coming to them has come from them, from people that they're dependent on. One who enjoys it is just stealing. It's like a thief. So, ultimately this process is to make one realize that we are dependent, and that therefore we have a duty to repay those upon whom we are dependent, and that we are not the center of the world, basically, that our pleasure is not the center. And ultimately, one who engages in this process, the process of karmakanda as recommended in the Vedas, ultimately realizes, Krishna says in the 3rd chapter, Mayi sarvani karmani sannyāsī adhyatma cetasa. One ultimately comes to the point where he realizes that the source, Krishna describes that the source of the demigod's prowess, the source of the demigod's ability to give boons, to give benedictions, is me, because I'm the Supreme Lord, he says. So therefore, one should take to the direct process, and by the process of karmakanda, one ultimately comes to that platform where one realizes that actually everything that I do should be with this sannyāsī adhyatma cetasa. One should have this consciousness, this renounced consciousness, that not just renounced just like giving things up, but not doing anything for one's own pleasure, but doing everything for Krishna's pleasure. And that process, Srila Prabhupada describes in the purport here, and I'm sorry we're getting late, but I'll just try to speak about this briefly, because Srila Prabhupada spends the whole purport talking about it. In Atlanta, the classes go until 9, so I'm sorry I wasn't looking at the clock, because I've been used to giving later classes. Yeah. So this process of doing everything wholly and solely for the purpose of Krishna's pleasure is called archana, as Srila Prabhupada brings up in the purport. And it begins with this verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. It begins with renouncing all dharmas, or all processes of religion, Srila Prabhupada says, which do not center around worshiping the Supreme Lord. And therefore, one who reaches this stage performs the archana process. Archana, generally speaking, is understood to mean just the worship of the deity on the altar. But actually, archana is a whole lifestyle. And Srila Prabhupada hints at that in this purport, that archana is not just the worship of the deity on the altar, but archana is a lifestyle which is centered around the pleasure of the deity. And this process is given in a book, in a series of books, you could say, called Pancharatra. Pañcaratra means 5 nights. It was a, you could say, a process which was spoken by Narada Muni in, you guessed it, 5 nights to some sages, different sages. And so this gives the process for Vaiṣṇavas, for worshippers of Krishna and worshippers of Vishnu, to center their entire lives around the pleasure of God, around the pleasure of Krishna. And in this lifestyle, there are also rituals, there are also nitya kriyas and naimittika kriyas, like I stated in this verse. There's also things that you should do every day, things that you should do occasionally on certain occasions. Occasionally on certain occasions. Naimittika, yeah. So in that Pañcaratric lifestyle, or Pañcaratriki vidhi, as Srila Prabhupada describes it in many places, there are also nitya kriyas, naimittika kriyas that one should perform. But all of them are, I mean, for one thing is that they're simplified. They're not as elaborate. They don't require as much, time and effort and all this, kind of, perhaps I shouldn't say crazy stuff, but maybe I'll just use the word crazy conventionally. Maybe like unreasonable stuff for people, who don't have that kind of karma and that kind of piety. But anyway, they're simplified, and they're wholly and solely centered around Krishna. There's no worship of the demigods. There's no worship, separate worship of the demigods, separate worship of the forefathers. Like Srila Prabhupada says here, one can install deities of Radha Krishna, Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narayan, Lord Jagannath, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And by offering food prepared in ghee, and then offering the sanctified prasad to the forefathers, demigods, and other living entities as a matter of routine daily work. So, worshiping the demigods and worshiping the forefathers is, they're good principles in general. But if one wants to worship them, and one doesn't have to worship them, if one is wholly and solely worshiping the Supreme Personality of God, they're automatically worshipped. But if one does worship them, then they worship them only with the Lord's prasadam. They worship them only as servants of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, we see in the examples of our acharyas, Mahaprabhu, he visited Bhuvaneshwar. This is described in the Antya Lila of Chaitanya Bhagavat. He visited Bhuvaneshwar. He worshipped, the Shiva lingams there. But he worshipped them as devotees of the Supreme Lord. He worshipped Shiva as a devotee of the Lord. Vaiṣṇavanam yatha Shambhu. This verse is given in Shastra that the best of the Vaiṣṇavas, the best of the devotees of Krishna is Shiva. And similarly, also Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he also visited demigod temples like this. But there are also certain Vaishnavas who just don't, who are very strict about not doing so, and that's also fine. That's also good. That's also in line with our tradition. So. Also, I was mentioning that they were simplified. One example is like Sandhya Vandanam. We also do Sandhya Vandanam. We're also instructed by our acharyas to do Sandhya Vandanam. What is that Sandhya Vandanam? We just chant mantras. We chant mantras, and we might do some achman before to purify ourselves, but we chant our Gayatri mantra, we chant our Diksha mantras, and then we offer obeisances to our spiritual master. It's simplified. And why is it simplified? Because the point of karmakanda is to give people who otherwise would be engaged in sinful activities engagement, to engage them instead in rituals. And in that way, their consciousness can become purified. But those who are devotees of the Supreme Lord, rituals are good, but there is so much other engagement to be had. There's so many other things to do in the service of the Lord that rituals can be kind of given you could say, a secondary position. For instance, preaching and so many things. Especially for us, for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, preaching. So, briefly, I'll just give a small description of this. There's 5 limbs of Pañcaratra, 5 limbs of this lifestyle, which Srila Prabhupada is describing here. The members of the Krishna consciousness movement engage daily in such transcendental activities. like worshiping the deity and offering the sanctified prasad to forefathers, demigods, and other living entities. So there's abhigamana, which this is the first of the 5 limbs. Abhigamana means waking up in the morning, bathing, reciting mantra, perhaps reciting mantras, but especially waking up, bathing, going to the temple, preparing oneself for going to the... Abhigamana literally means approaching the temple. So you prepare yourself. It's described, and there's, whatever, more complicated and less complicated ways of doing it. But when you wake up, like offering obeisances to your spiritual master, bathing, putting on tila, getting dressed in clean clothes, then coming to the temple. Upadana, preparing the articles for worship, gathering the, sufficient flowers and whatever is needed for worship. Then there's yoga, spiritualizing the body by different mantras, identifying oneself as a servant of Krishna. Then there's the actual worship, ija, which, offering arti and things like that. And then svadhyaya. Svadhyaya means one's personal cultivation of Krishna consciousness. And that's the whole point. The whole point of all of these rituals, the whole point of ija, the whole point of everything, is to cultivate our Krishna consciousness. Etiyor, what's that verse? Etiyor eva kinkaraha. Satatam, no. Yasmartavya satatam Vishnu vismartavya najatujit. Sarvavidi nishedhyasur etiyor eva kinkaraha. That the main thing is one should always remember Krishna and one should never forget him. And all rituals, all vidhi, all nisheda, all rules, all restrictions, the whole thing is focused on this principle. They're all servants of this principle, to always remember Krishna and never forget him. Therefore, it's not as strict for us. Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes that there's no sin incurred if one misses, for instance, chanting their Gayatri, if they're engaged in some activity. It means if they have to, if you can, step aside and just chant your Gayatri quickly, you should. But if you can't, if there's some reason that you just absolutely cannot, because you're engaged in service to the Lord or you're engaged in glorifying the Lord, then there's no sin incurred. And Gayatri Devi, the personification of the Gayatri mantra, she's not offended. Because what's the essence of chanting Gayatri? The essence of chanting Gayatri is to worship the Supreme Lord and to glorify him. And so all of these things, the purpose of them is not just to avoid sin and therefore become happy, but the purpose of them is to make Krishna happy. And therefore devotees aren't worried. Devotees aren't worried about karma. Devotees don't avoid sinful activity because they're scared of karma. Devotees aren't afraid of karma whatsoever. Devotees are afraid of displeasing Krishna. They're afraid of making Krishna upset or making Krishna sad. And sinful activity does indeed, it doesn't make Krishna happy. And besides that, there also might be some, reaction. But devotees aren't worried about that. Devotees aren't worried about their own happiness. They're wholly and solely worried about the happiness of Krishna. And therefore they live their entire lives for the purpose of pleasing Krishna. And whatever rituals they do, whatever mantras they chant, whatever they do, is all wholly and solely for the pleasure of Krishna, for the sense gratification of Krishna. Therefore it said here, Muni Anna, one should offer very nice food to Krishna. Not for oneself, for ourselves we can take very simple prasadam, but for the deity, very nice prasadam should be cooked, like Srila Prabhupada says here, cooked in ghee, and other, first-class vegetables and things like that should be offered to Krishna. Because there's a verse in the 3rd chapter, there was a series of verses actually. Yastvatmanatireva syad atmatriptasya manava atmanyeva cha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. For one who is satisfied in his position as a servant of Krishna, one who knows the Supreme Lord, for him there's no duty. There's no duty to please Krishna. We don't necessarily, or for pure devotees, they don't feel that pleasing Krishna is just something that they have to do. It's something they want to do. And so they don't have obligations to perform certain things because, well, the next verse describes why. Naiva tasya kritena arto na kritena kashchana. Because the purpose of the rituals, the purpose of them, is to regulate our lives in such a way that we can always remember Krishna. But for a pure devotee who is always remembering Krishna anyway, naivatasya kritenarto na kriteneha kaśana. He has nothing to gain. There's no purpose. He has nothing to gain from performing the rituals. And he also has nothing to gain from not performing them. He's there. He's reached the goal. It's like you don't continue, for instance, if you have I don't know. Well, I guess there's this phrase, a little bit of a crude phrase, but they say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the point of these rituals and things like that are for fixing us, are for fixing our consciousness. But if there's nothing wrong with our consciousness, if we're pure devotees, and of course pure devotees means that one has accepted a spiritual master, one has served the spiritual master faithfully, one has followed everything very clearly in a regulated way and has followed the process for becoming a pure devotee. Then when by the grace of the Guru and by the grace of Krishna one becomes a pure devotee, then he doesn't necessarily have to perform anything. And therefore you have this verse from Madhavendra Puri. He says, Sandhya vandana bhadram astu bhavato bhosnana tubhyam namo bho deva pitarasya tarpana vado naham kshamaksham yatam. Excuse me. Yatra kvapi nashadya yadava kulotam sasyakam sadvisha smaram smaram agam harami tadalam manyeka manyena me. He says, Sandhya vandana bhadramastu. He says, bhadramastu bhavato. He says, Sandhya vandana, these very elaborate prayers 3 times a day. He says, let there be all auspiciousness to you. Bhadramastu bhavato. And he says, Snana tubhyam namo. He says, and bathing, in a regulated way, and all the rituals around bathing, he says, I offer my obeisances to you. Snana tubhyam namo. Bho deva pitarashya tarpana vado naham kshamakshamitam. And he says, offering oblations to the forefathers and to the demigods, he says, again, I offer my respects to you. Let there be auspiciousness for you. But unfortunately, I cannot follow you anymore. Naham kshamakshamitam. And he says, Yatra kvapi nishadya yadava kulotam sasyakam sadvisha. Because now I'm constantly remembering the Krishna, Yadava kulotam sasyakam sadvisha, who's the Yadava kulotam sasyakam sadvisha. He's the enemy of Kamsa, and he's the crest jewel or the ultimate person in the dynasty of the Yadus. And then he says, Smaram smaram agam harami tadalam manyeka manyena me. And he says, I think just by remembering him over and over again, all of my sins will be removed and I don't have to do anything else. So for pure devotees that are on that platform, they don't have to do anything. And we see actually many pure devotees, even this process of archana, they don't follow very strictly. And in fact, they might do some things which look maybe against that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there in relation to this purport. But thus, in our Krishna consciousness movement, there's no question of killing animals. There's no question of performing sinful activities for our own sense gratification. Because everything is for the sense gratification of Krishna. And so this whole process of archana, centering our lives, and this isn't just for brāhmaṇas, but anybody. Anybody living in a temple, around a temple, or as part of a temple community, should center their lives around the worship of the deity. And in this way, one's life becomes very happy. Srila Prabhupada says they engage. This process of sacrifice brings complete satisfaction. Satisfaction to us, satisfaction to Krishna, satisfaction to all the living entities. And like this, we can become liberated. So I'm sorry I went 13 minutes over time, now 14 minutes over time. Please forgive me. If there's any comments or questions, we can briefly entertain them. Unless there's not. Yes.
With the lifestyle of switching to a vegetarian, I've had my ups and downs. Because I know that I've tried it before, and I was 18 days in, and I started wanting to eat meat again and stuff like that, and slowly started eating meat again. And I noticed that you said people that come to the temple often and stuff like that, it's a better idea to center ourselves around the lifestyle of being a vegetarian and, you know, giving up meat and something like that. And I noticed that, you know, a lot of the monks and stuff like that especially makes it look easy to, you know, kind of just give up meat wholeheartedly. And so my question was, like, what are ways that I could do to, like, give up meat totally and, you know, actually become more devoted?
Yeah. One thing, well, there's a few things to say. There is something to say that giving up anything is difficult. So there will naturally be some difficulty if, you know, when one first gives something up. And I remember also when I first went vegetarian or vegan when I was in my teens, I also had some difficulty, and I, you know, kind of went back and forth for some time, and then eventually it kind of stuck. So that's one thing, is just to continue to try. And another thing is also, you know, one should look into how they can, you know, obtain proper nutrition, because if one is used to eating in a certain way and then they change their diet and they don't feel like they're getting proper nutrition, or they don't know how to get proper nutrition from that diet, then, you know, they'll feel hungry and they'll get cravings for certain things, and then they, you know, kind of go back to eating meat or whatever it is. So those two things, it takes some, you know, amount of just like control, of just like kind of like brute force, like, okay, I want to do this, and you just have to want it enough to be able to do it. And another thing is one just has to be strategic and understand what their body needs and how to get, you know, how to meet the needs of the body on, you know, the diet that they're following.
So, yeah, with the diet too, like, at my job, I don't really like make that much money. So like I had to save my money. So, you know, I've noticed that like just a carnivorous diet is just cheaper as well.
Yeah, there's one thing is meat is cheap because it's subsidized like anything, because the government puts money into it more so than they do another things. Another thing also is that, you know, there are vegetarian foods, like, for instance, like the ultra-processed, like veggie burgers and things like that. Those are naturally more expensive because most of them are made in like labs and stuff like that. So that requires a lot of money. But I mean, beans, you know, rice, vegetables, you know, these like more natural foods are not so expensive. Definitely doable, especially, I mean, we're talking about like poor people, you know, poor people in India, you know, impoverished people. This is what they're eating. Yeah, beans, rice, vegetables, you know, ghee, milk, you know, all these things. Ghee is like clarified butter. So these things are not so expensive. You know, they're doable for most people. So that's something to consider. Yeah. Anything more? Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki